and I'm just going to walk you through some of the most important points. The first important point before we even look at the cover page is referencing. I cannot stress the importance of referencing enough. Please note there is a new reference guide, and please make sure you are using the 2025 reference guide. Now, how to know when to reference. Essentially, if it did not come out of your brain, you need to reference it. If you read it somewhere, if you saw it somewhere, you have to reference that. Now, if you take what you have learned, what you have read on slides, what you've watched on the YouTube videos, and you have now, that has sparked an idea in you, and you've now synthesized new knowledge. That knowledge is yours, you don't have to reference it. But if it came from anywhere else, please, 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 you must reference it. The next thing that I need to stress is AI. Please note there is a guideline on the responsible use of AI. Please make sure that you have gone through that thoroughly and that you've understood it. When in doubt, please don't use AI. That would be my advice. I know AI is a very powerful tool. If you are very comfortable with knowing how to use it correctly, if you are very comfortable with the AI guidelines, that's fine. But if you have any doubt at all, my suggestion would be to just not use it. This is really important because if you use AI incorrectly in a didactic module, which this is, then that puts your teaching prac in jeopardy. So if we prove that you have used AI incorrectly, that means you can't do your teaching prac this year. So please, cannot emphasize this enough, responsible use of AI. Okay, now that's the really heavy stuff out the way. Let's get on to this paper, which is actually very, very practical. It's a lot of applying what you know. Okay, and please note we submit through Turnitin now, not SafeAssign. So here is your rubric for referencing. So your minor errors, we deduct 5%, major errors, we deduct 10%. That's 5% of your overall mark or 10% of your overall mark. So please try to avoid any errors in your referencing. Use that referencing guide. Everything you need is in there. And please make sure you are using it so that you don't lose marks just for referencing incorrectly. Okay, so these are the learning outcomes that you are going to have to fulfill in order to do this assignment. Okay, 4 individual questions. Okay, there's no real prescribed reading for this course. However, there is a recommended reading, there's a recommended textbook. There's additional reading required, which means you have to go out and do your own research. Okay, you have an academic paragraph, you have an essay. Reference rubric, it's not going to be submitted through SafeAssign, it's going to be submitted through Turnitin. But what I do want to point out, and it does say NB here, your lecturer will not mark beyond the maximum word count for the question. And guys, I do not believe in marking beyond the word count. So I open Microsoft Words and I copy and paste and I see how many words there are. So please don't think, well, it looks like 1,750 words. I'm very familiar with how long 1,750 words looks like. So I do double check that. So please make sure you're sticking to that word count. Now, if you are at 1,450 words, no problem. If you're at 1,200 words, now you need to start looking at, have I written enough? Because that's 300 words below where I'm supposed to be, because you're supposed to be between 1,500 and 1,750. I know that sounds like a lot. Please do not panic. Once you get into it, there is a lot to say. That's why I emphasize the don't go over the word count instead of emphasizing make sure you reach the word count, because it's easy to reach the word count. So let's look at question 1. The science department at your school wants to take away 1 hour lesson of matric English a week and give that lesson to science. Their rationale is that science is more difficult and time-consuming than English, and that English is not as important as science. Write an email of between 200 and 300 words to the head of the science department explaining why the matric students should not give up their English lesson. In your email, be sure to include reference to the following. Now, okay, email. Your biggest concern here, the most difficult part of this is going to be keeping it to 300 words. Please remember, we don't mark past the word limit. So I stop reading at 300 words. I don't read word 301. So make sure everything in the email, from the greeting to the salutation, is an absolute maximum of 300. If you hit 300 perfectly, then I'll mark it all. But if your salutation is at the end is 301, 302, 303, I can't mark you as having completed the format. So it's going to be a bit of a challenge to keep it to 300 words. What that means is you need to pick out the most obvious things. Now, from a practical point of view, let's look at it. In an email, no one reads more than 300 words. That's just the reality. Number 2, the science teacher has no idea what English is about, what goes on in English, and the reality is the science teacher doesn't really care. So you're only going to lay out the most important and the most obvious pieces of information. So the 3 things you're going to look at. The first is the CAPS document. Now, there's a specific reason why the CAPS document is included in this instruction. Because remember, the CAPS document is the department issued instructions. So only look at what's relevant about the CAPS document. If you think about it, it's really obvious how the CAPS document is related to the issue of science wanting to take away a lesson from English. You just need to state that. The core English skills. So here, once again, the science teacher has no idea what English is about. So you want to state the most obvious points about the core English skills. You want to relate that back to why you can't give up an hour lesson. So you're not going to go into in-depth detail and go off on a tangent explaining all the nuances. You're going to focus on explaining the link between these core skills we teach in English and why we can't give up an hour. And then the importance of English for academic success. Guys, this is very obvious. Just, if I can put it bluntly, go for the obvious kill here. Explain why English is important for academic success. Once again, you don't have the words to go into explicit detail. You have to state it bluntly and to the point. Now, if you're coming in at under 200 words, that's not good. That is a problem. That means you haven't explained enough. So you really are aiming for the upper 200s in order to ensure that you've completed the instructions. So just to recap, you're going to state the obvious. You are going to link each of those 3 areas to why English should not give up an hour of its scheduled time. Then, of course, attend to correct email format and etiquette. What we are assessing here is, can you write an email? Because that's really difficult. Not really difficult. It's something we do all day, every day, but it's something really important that we do in our daily lives. You're going to be sending emails to teachers all the time. So we want to know, can you put the correct formatting? So the correct formatting to colon and then an email address, subject colon and a succinct subject line. Okay, we're going to be checking to make sure your subject line is appropriate. Those do not count towards the word count. The word count starts from the beginning of the email. Do you put in a greeting? Do you have an introduction and a conclusion? Remember, those can be one line. Do you have paragraphs? Are your paragraphs linked? Does the order of the paragraphs make sense? So those are the things that we are looking for when we look at correct email format and etiquette. Now, not to hop on it too much, but this is the rubric. You are looking at this over here, preferably this side. The email answers the question extremely well and shows maturity of thought and interesting and logical connectors. The email fully and thoughtfully explores the importance of the CAPS document, the core English skills, and relation between English skills and academic success. So have you explored it? Now, when we say fully, we mean, have you stated the obvious and is it clear? Okay, you can't just make it so succinct that it doesn't make sense anymore. So don't try and shrink it down to the least possible so it doesn't make sense. Just make sure you've stated the obvious and you've stated it clearly and you've made that link back to why English needs that hour. And then the next thing is form, structure and format. The email format is completely conform to including a succinct, interesting, and relevant subject line. There you go. It's in the rubric. You've been told to do it. The paragraphs flow clearly and logically from one to the next through an accurate use of transitions. What we mean by that is when you start a new paragraph, you don't just start it bluntly. There's always some sort of transition. So a transition word or a transition phase. In addition to this, on the other hand, following on from this, those are all transitions. The text is free or mostly free from errors of spelling and grammar, i.e. it is clear that the student has proofread the email. One little spelling error creeps in, it's not the end of the world. If you've got 4 spelling errors in a 300-word email, I'm starting to go, well, did you actually proofread this? So that is what will get you your 20 marks over there. Now, let's go to question 2. Now, guys, I know it's 10 marks, but please remember that is 10%. This is a paragraph, which means it is no more than 1 page. Anything more than a page is now an essay. Okay, so it should be less than a page. If it goes over a page, stop, go, trim down. Okay, it's got to be a paragraph. I would say a minimum of half a page, a maximum of 1 page. So in a structured and academically sound paragraph, what that means is that you have to do research. So we are looking to see if you've got references in there. Okay. Explain the importance of acknowledging diversity in the classroom and discuss with examples the ways in which teachers can accommodate diversity in the FET classroom. So there are 2 parts to this. The importance of acknowledging diversity in the classroom. Now, some ideas are going to come from you. Some ideas need to show that you've researched this. So that's where your research is going to come in. Also, you probably can come up with some of your own ideas. Then you need to discuss with examples the ways in which teachers can accommodate diversity in the FET classroom. What we're looking at here is specific practical examples. A teacher could, for example, ensure that all texts are written by both genders. That is a terrible, terrible example. Do not use it, but you see what I mean by practical suggestion. Or can ensure that worksheets have A, B, and C on them. So things that you would use in a real lesson. So if someone came up to you and said, well, I have absolutely no idea how to, I know you've got to acknowledge diversity, but how on earth do you actually do that in a classroom? Okay, guys, open your minds, come up with ideas. Okay, feel free to come up with your own ideas for this. You can research ideas, that's great, but also don't be shy to put your own ideas. So I will tell you right now, if it's out of 10, 2 marks are going to be allocated for the format, the structure, and the referencing. So does it have an introductory sentence? Does it have a topic sentence? Does it have a concluding sentence? Does the paragraph make sense in terms of, do the ideas follow logically from one another? Okay, so that's question 2. Now, question 3. This is half theory, half practical. Choose one of the 3 following poems from the matric curriculum. This is the National Senior Certificate curriculum. I don't know if it has changed since this paper was set. I don't think it has, but these are the 3 poems. Remember by Christina Rossetti, The Garden of Love by William Blake, and the Jeremy Cronin. I am sorry, but my pronunciation is awful and I'm simply going to butcher that. So please accept my apologies. What you're going to do, you're going to choose one poem. Please only choose one, not reading. If you do 2, I'm not reading the second one. I'm marking the first one. So choose one poem. Then you choose one of the teaching approaches to literature that you would use to teach this poem. Okay, so the 4 approaches. In reality, you would use more than one approach. Okay, that's the reality of the situation. Right now, we're just asking for you to select one. Now, I want you to ask yourself, does this poem make more sense if the reader understands the time period in which it was set? Does the poem make more sense if the reader understands who the author was? And then you go through the approaches like that. Some poems, it does not matter who the author is. The author could be anyone, and it's not going to make a difference. In others, who the author is and what happened in their life may bring a deeper understanding of the poem. So if, for example, the poem was written by Nelson Mandela on Robben Island, that is going to make a difference to the way you read it. So then the author approach and the chronological approach and the theme approach. In that case, you would choose for this question the author approach, because that is one of the most important approaches. Now, next question I know is going to be, is there a one correct answer for each of these? Now, simple answer is no. I personally know which approach I would think is very important for each one of these. And I'll give you a hint, it's a different approach for each one. However, if you can argue that your approach is suitable for the poem, then you get the marks. So there isn't one correct answer. There is an obvious answer for each one of them that's easy to explain. And the other approaches, some of them are not relevant at all. Some of them are also relevant, and you can argue for one of those. I hope that makes sense. Simple answer is, if you can make a good case for why that teaching approach is the best teaching approach for this poem, then you get the marks. Now, what you have to do once you've chosen your poem and your teaching approach, now you actually do the question. You have to explain the approach. Explain the approach means I don't understand the approach. So if you say the author approach, pretend I have no idea what that means and explain it to me. And then justify why this approach is suitable to use to teach this poem. So this is where you argue your case. And if you argue your case well, done. You get marks for it. But don't forget the last sentence. Provide practical examples in your justification. What that means is you have to take quotes from the poem and explain why your approach applies to this line or this stanza or this part of the poem. So you actually have to use parts of the poem to justify why your approach is the best approach to use to teach it. Okay, now a lot of people explain their approach beautifully. They have a general justification, but they forget to actually provide practical examples from the poem. So please don't forget that. Then question 2. Design an original and engaging resource that you will use in the lesson to teach this poem. Ensure your resource is informative and clearly linked to the teaching approach you identified in question 2.1. So that's an important one. Whatever you choose, it has to clearly show the teaching approach. So if you chose the author approach, your resource has to focus on how the author links to the poem. This resource can be anything. Now, I know at first that sounds a bit scary, but this is your chance to shine. This is your chance to think a little bit outside the box. This is your chance to actually have some fun. I know, I can feel you glaring at me. I know assignments aren't supposed to be where you have fun, but how often have you looked at a resource that you got when you were at school, or a resource that you are given to give to your students, and you've thought, wow, this resource is boring. And you've sort of thought of all of the things you would have preferred to do if you'd had the freedom to do it. That's what I want you to think about now. So what we are looking at anything, infographics, worksheets, presentations, videos, does not matter. As long as you are 100% sure that you can either put it into your assignment, or if you use a link in your assignment to an outside source, that link has to work. If that link does not work, I can't give you any marks. So if you're doing a presentation, I do suggest you take screenshots and put them on, as well as the link, for example. just so that if the link does break, there is something that I can work with. So in terms of what the resource is, that is up to you. A resource is something that is used for you to teach the poem and for the learners to learn about the poem. So what we're looking for is it informative? So it has to be informative. So a worksheet where you just asking them to fill in the blanks, not so informative. So it has to be informative. Now, worksheets can be very informative, and it has to be linked to your teaching approach. So think about that when you choose your teaching approach. Let's just look at the rubric for this. Okay. The resource promotes the teaching and learning of the chosen poem exceptionally well. So it really, having this resource enhances your teaching and it enhances their learning. It's going to really help them when it comes to studying for exams, for example. And then the resource is completely suitable for a matric class. So it can't be too babyish. They aren't grade 8s, they're not going to respond to anything too babyish. But by the same token, it can't be sort of university level. That's too high for them. So you're aiming for that sweet spot. Then, the resource is informative and uses the identified approach. Resource is highly informative and engaging. Guys, please don't put me to sleep with your resources. If your resources are really dull and boring, and I've seen this before, and there's nothing new to it, well, is it really achieving its goal of teaching and learning? So it has to be engaging. All that means is that I need to see you put some effort into making it a bit interesting, whether it's images, whether it's color, whatever it is, it's got to make me want to look at the resource. And is the teaching approach clearly and extremely effectively used? So you've used it clearly and effectively. So pretty straightforward, that one. Now the big one. Question 4. So this essay question focuses on specific aspects of Learning Unit 1. Your assessor will use the marking rubric Appendix C at the end of this paper to evaluate the quality of your response. As such, you should ensure that you are satisfied that all required question components are present and of a high standard before submitting your assignment. What they're saying in an indirect way is read the rubric. There might be more information in the rubric that's going to help you. Then we have a quote. The communicative approach is based on the concept that language learning occurs when the teacher gets learners to see the language pragmatically, to mediate meanings for a purpose, to do things which resemble in some measure what they do in their own language. So this is just to give you a little bit of context. So we're talking about the communicative approach, and obviously we're talking about second language students who need to practice their English so that they can see the resemblance between what they do in English and what they do in their own native tongue. So I don't want you to get caught up on the quote. It's just there to give you a bit of background, a little bit of context, but I don't want you to now get caught up and go, oh, this is really part of the question. No, it's just to give some background to the question. With this above statement in mind, you are required to compose an academic essay of between 1,500 to 1,750 words, comprising both expository and discursive elements. So let me explain. If you are coming in, there isn't a specific penalization for being too short. But what that means if you're coming in under 1,500 is you haven't provided enough depth in your essay. You need to go and expand on your points. If you're coming in at 900 words, listen, from a marking point of view, that's fantastic. From your point of view, you are going to be losing marks on the content because there simply isn't enough. People ask, how many words can I go over? You have a range of 250 words. You're looking at a minimum of 1,500. Anything below that, and you're risking not writing enough, not having enough substance. We stop reading at 1,750. So if your conclusion is outside of that, you don't have a conclusion to your essay. Anything above that number does not exist. Okay. So please don't ask how many words over will we go. We don't go over. The next thing that's really important is expository and discursive elements. So you have to explain and you have to discuss. Now, before I go into what the essay really wants you to write about, which is actually not as important as this sort of preface. This is a postgrad course. So some of you would have been told in undergrad, you don't write down anything unless you can reference it. Postgrad, we want your ideas as well. What we do not want is just a string of sentences that are referenced and strung together to resemble an essay. So I don't want every single sentence to be someone else's ideas. All that's told me is that you can collate information. I'm not looking to see if you can collate information. Now, I know those of you who've read it are going, but Amy, it says you have to reference 4 academic sources. Yes, 100%, you have to reference at least 4 different sources. So, what is the best way to approach this? When you reference, so when you use your paraphrasing, that is either a springboard for your own discussion. So someone had this idea, and now you discuss what that means in the context of the essay. So it's a starting point for your discussion, or else you have a discussion and your reference is there as a foundation to say, hey, look, this isn't completely out the blue. Someone else who is an academic agrees with what I have to say. So your references are your support structure. You have to discuss. The best way to do this is for you to start off by writing down all your ideas. Now, guys, just do a brain dump. There's no editing. No one is going to see it. If at the end of this essay, you want to go out in the middle of the night and burn that piece of paper, feel free. Doesn't matter what you put on it. Doesn't matter how stupid it is. Put down your stupidest ideas. Put down your brilliant ideas. And then look at your ideas. Pick out the strongest ideas that are relevant to the essay topic, and then go and do some research to find ways to have research prop up what you have come up with. So I need to see your ideas in here. So this is where I can see that you have synthesized new knowledge. You've taken what someone said and that sparked an idea in you, and you have something pertinent to say on the matter. Okay, I hope that all makes sense. Now, what is it you're going to include in your essay? You have to explain the communicative and the text-based approaches to teaching. Explain means I don't know what those two are. I've never come across those terms. You have to explain them to me. Okay, there's going to be some referencing involved here. Then you need to discuss the advantages of using these approaches to teach the core English skills. So I want you to reference those individual skills when you talk about the advantages. You're not talking about the advantages in general. You can mention the advantages in general, but I want you to specifically talk about the advantages of using that approach for listening, speaking, reading, viewing, writing, presenting, structures and conventions. Not every single skill, but you have to look at which skills are most advantageously taught using which method. Okay. Now, provide practical examples of lessons and activities you, as an FET educator, could use to integrate these approaches into the classroom. Once again, I want you to be very, very practical. You are describing what you would do. So you are describing, for example, an introduction that you would use using the communicative approach. You would describe an activity that you would do using the text-based approach. And please be specific. Now, I know sometimes it can be a bit intimidating when we say use your own ideas. Guys, you're going to get more marks for your idea than if you just take from other people. If you're just taking other people's ideas and referencing them, yeah, you'll get some marks. But you would have gotten more if you had come up with something yourself, even if it wasn't as effective as the other people's. You'll get more marks because you came up with it. You showed that you have understood these approaches enough that you could use them in an FET classroom. That's what we're looking for. Okay. So use your own rationale to develop your discussion and exposition. What that means is we want your thoughts. So you're going to reference someone, but we want your thoughts on that reference, your thoughts on that idea, and expand on your thoughts. Adhering to the principles of sound academic writing practices commensurate with the level of academia. Ensure that you refer to credible resource and published source material to support your essay with reference to no less than 4 academic sources. Okay. What we are talking about there is your references have to be academic. Use the library, look for journals, look for books. Okay. Those are considered academic sources. A blog post is not an academic source. You're not going to get credit for that. You need to look at the structure of your essay. It needs to have an introduction, needs to have a conclusion, and it needs to have a logical flow between paragraphs with good transitions between the paragraphs. So let's look at the rubric. So the level of engagement with theory and critical reading. The essay engages with theory and critical reading in a manner that demonstrates exceptional critical thinking, narrative synthesis, and maturity of thought. What that means is that you've actually understood your academic source. You've understood the resource and you've used it judiciously. So you have taken something that really adds to your essay, someone's idea, that really adds to your essay, and you have expanded on it to show that you understand what it means. So that's what we're looking at, that you don't just take any random reference and shove it in there. You actually engage with the readings. That's 12 marks, so 12%. Then the argument. The discursive and expository argument is largely insightful, intuitive, and well developed throughout the essay. So you've actually got something to say throughout the essay. The argument fully addresses all aspects of the essay question and does so in a holistic and thought-provoking manner. So you've looked at everything. It is very easy to read an essay question, put the paper down, write your essay. Don't do that. Refer back to that essay question all the time to make sure you're on track. Make sure that you're not just writing down sort of mundane, repetitive, anyone could have come up with it. It's just nothing new. I actually want to see you thinking about it and making logical connections and substantiations across and beyond the prescribed material. So you are connecting the material and your practical examples to your essay. So you're not just randomly shoving in pieces of information. You're actually making an argument. In this case, we don't mean argument as in fighting, means you are explaining and discussing everything that the essay topic asks you to do in a logical and thoughtful manner. Now, practical application. The essay provides exceptional and practical examples that clearly apply the communicative and the text-based approach. These examples would greatly enhance the teaching and learning experience. Once again, don't be scared to use your own ideas. We want to see that you can come up with ideas of how to use the text-based and then the communicative approach in the classroom. And then we have academic writing, presentation, and quality. Essay presentation style, language use, and structures are largely commensurate with academic excellence. So if you make an error, it's largely excellent. So we're not looking for perfection, we're looking for near perfection. Paragraphs are succinct and sufficiently fleshed out and flow clearly and logically from one to the next through an accurate use of transitions. Yes, I know exactly what you're thinking. Amy, you just contradicted yourself. What we mean is it's succinct in that it doesn't have a whole lot of fluff where you repeat the same thing 3 times to make up the word count. So everything in that paragraph is an idea that builds on the previous one. You're not repeating yourself. But also it's fleshed out. So you've explained it fully. So you don't want to be sitting repeating yourself, but you want to make sure that you've explained it to the very best of your ability. And also that each paragraph has a transition. So we spoke about those. Those are your words and phrases that lead you from one paragraph to the next. The text is free or mostly free from errors of spelling and grammar, i.e. it is clear that the student has proofread the essay. Okay, so I need to see that you proofread it, that you've made an effort to get rid of all the spelling and grammar mistakes. Right. Now, that is a lot of information. Please feel free to watch the video in chunks. I say right at the very end when it's too late. But I hope that I have cleared up any questions you might have had. I hope I have made clear what is expected from you in each question. In your collab sessions, you will have a 15-minute question and answer session where you bring your questions to the question and answer session, and your lecturer will try their best to answer as much as they can. Good luck with this, and please try as far as possible to enjoy it.